Welcome back. It's the AEMT lecture series. This will be video number 2 for anatomy physiology. Anatomy and physiology review for the National Registry EMTA testing. Today in video 2, we're talking about cellular respiration, and we're talking about in that glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Now, we don't need to make this too complicated, but yet we need to be able to give you the information that you need that's mentioned in the book as well. That's my goal. It's hard to teach this because there's about 50 steps to this part, and I need to skip about 40 of them, and that's okay, but just bear with me as I try to do this. All right, so here's a cell that you're looking at. This is a whole cell, even though that there's 2 blocks. This is one big cell. This represents the cytoplasm, and down here, this represents an organelle known as the mitochondria. In glycolysis, let's talk about cellular respirations. There's 3 parts to this, right? There's 3 parts. To cellular respiration. All right, and the first part of that is going to be, and when we're talking about cellular respiration, let's talk about what it means. It means glucose and oxygen release energy from organic compounds through 3 reaction types. The first being glycolysis. All right, the first one is glycolysis. And of course, glycolysis, just like I said, occurs in the cytoplasm. Hang on one second. I'm just kind of looking at my notes really quick. All right, and then the second is the Krebs cycle. And in the Krebs cycle, it's in the mitochondria, and it's denoted right over here. Krebs cycle, mitochondria here. But this is a sequence of reactions. Metabolism of carbon chains of glucose, fatty acids, amino acids. And again, as long as oxygen's present, everything goes right, we'll get carbon dioxide, some water, and some high energy. Well, in the Krebs cycle, we're not going to get high energy yet. We're going to get 2 moles of ATP. And then from the Krebs cycle to the electron transport chain, there is where we're going to get our high energy ATP. So let's talk about it and see if we can understand it. So to start with, though, we had to have some glucose. So again, glucose is one of the players. All right, and it crosses into the cell, into the cytoplasm. Now, if oxygen is not present, the reaction can still occur. Okay, the reaction can still occur. It's going to meet up with pyruvate acid, which pyruvate's fate is based on if oxygen's here or not. Pyruvate gets to stick around if oxygen's here, but since oxygen's not here, it's going to go away. It gets changed over to the big bad lactic acid, and in the end, we get 2 moles of ATP. And that's it. And we need a lot more moles of ATP to be able to survive. All right, so that's, and this is called anaerobic. So anaerobic. All right, so let's get rid of that. And let's show you what it looks like with oxygen. All right, so the glucose comes over, it meets up with oxygen, again, it's going to make a few things. So when it does, it makes pyruvate acid. It's going to give us, and it's going to give us two pyruvates, and in these pyruvates, they're going to be carbon chains. So what I'm going to do here is just draw 3 circles to represent the 3 carbon chain, because your book kind of talks about that. So I want you to kind of understand it. You're going to get your 2 ATP, and you get 2 of something else, NADH. So what happens here, again, if you don't have oxygen, this combines these high energy electrons dump over here on the pyruvate acid, and that's what forms lactic acid. All right, so we have 3 carbon chains there. So what's going to happen here? All right, so let me draw this. All right, so this is pyruvate. All right, it's going to come down, and since it had oxygen up there, it gets to enter into the mitochondria. These are just high energy electrons. They're going to sneak down here and hang out in the electron transport chain. There. Now what happens? Pyruvate comes in, and there's a bunch of enzymes here that's going to meet up with pyruvate to change things around a little bit, okay? So one of those is called acetyl CoA. So let me write it here. All right. And then we have another one that I'm going to denote as OOA, and it is oxaloacetic acid. Okay, don't worry about that too much. So what happens? So we see these 3 things, right? The 3 carbon chain. When it comes down here, it ends up only having 2 carbons. So what happened to the other carbon? It broke off to give us CO2. All right, so CO2 there. This is now a 2 carbon chain. It comes down here, meets up with acetyl CoA, then meets up with OOA, and then is going to give us a 6 carbon chain, something known as citric acid. All right, and then it goes on. It goes on and on. All right, but that gives you an idea. So what we end up getting here is your CO2 there. Over here in the electron transport chain, your NADH is over here. Other high energy electrons are going to transfer over here. And the electron transport chain is going to spin these guys around, and they're going to go up and down, taking all of the electrons away. Like NADH, your hydrogen would be one of the electrons it's going to get. And then it takes that and turns that into, I can't remember, NAD plus. That's okay. And then, so everything comes over here, does that. But oxygen is the last thing to come over. Remember the oxygen? It came down as well since it had oxygen. That's why this oxygen has to be present. And so it's going to remove oxygen last. And then it's going to spit out, what does your book say, 32 or 33? Because every book is different. And I'm going to say 32. And it's either 32 or 33. But end of the day, it doesn't matter. 32 moles of ATP there. That's high energy. That's what we need to survive. And don't forget, we get our CO2 that comes from over here, plus our water. Our plasma needs that. So CO2, water, and we need heat because our body temperature, 98.2, needs to be maintained. We get all of that from here. Whew. So I think I was able to do that in, I'm trying to see how long, 10 minutes. So I think I kept your attention. I hope I did. All right, so let's review. Up here is the cytoplasm. And when we talk about glycolysis as being one part of cellular respiration, oxygen is optional in glycolysis. If oxygen is not present, you get glucose. That oxygen wouldn't be there. Pyruvate acid. NADH dumps over here onto pyruvate acid, changing that into lactic acid. Since oxygen is present, well, hang on before I go there. And then you get very low amount of energy. You get only 2 moles of ATP and it's over. Here we have glucose meeting up with oxygen, providing us with pyruvate acid, giving us 2 carbon chains of pyruvate acid, giving us 2 moles of ATP, and giving us 2 moles of NADH. Since we have oxygen, we are allowed to enter to the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, and we have 2 different sections here, something called the Krebs Cycle, and then we have the electron transport chain. So out of our 2 carbons of pyruvate, and I should draw maybe 2 of those there, one of the carbons gets yanked away to form CO2. We then meet up with acetyl CoA, who meets up with the enzyme OOA, producing 6 carbon chains of citric acid. This transfers over after a big long process of all the like NADH, CO2, etc. comes over here to the electron transport chain, where all the electrons are removed in a rather high speed type way. And so here's hydrogen's one, oxygen would be another, until it can produce 32 moles of ATP. We also get CO2 plus heat plus water. CO2 we already know is removed when we breathe. We expirate CO2. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed this. This is pretty much it. If you can kind of understand that this is about energy production. This is about where it is in the cell inside the organelle, the mitochondria, and it's all about ATP, cell energy, cell survival. That is it. Thank you. See you next time.